Thank you all for joining us tonight for this presentation from Jasmine Best. She is our current James Castle House resident. My name is Monica Galvan, and we are hybrid, so there are some people on Zoom and some people here in the room with us, so welcome everyone. I am the Cultural Sites Program Coordinator here for the James Castle House. And tonight we have Sierra McIver and Lavona Andrews, who will be providing ASL interpretation. And of course, Jasmine next to me. I'd like to give a little introduction to anybody who's not familiar with the James Castle House. The James Castle House celebrates the life and the work of American artist James Castle. And we do that through exhibitions, community programs, research, residency program, conservation and historic spaces. Through the Castle Works, we make sure that we show that work that he has done over the decades. The James Castle House is a program of the Boise City Department of Arts and History, which offers many other services, including public art, history programs, archives, cultural grants, and care and conservation. And I want to thank the city of Boise for this ongoing support and for remaining committed to our work at the Arts and History Department. Before I move on into this event, I like to acknowledge the broader history of the land the James Castle House sits on. We recognize the ancestral, cultural, traditional, and unceded territories of the Shoshone, Bannock, and Northern Paiute people whose land the site sits on today. The room where you're sitting in today has a current exhibition. It's called Foundations. The exhibit explores some of the styles and materials Castle worked with most often, and these include soot and spit, color, books, pattern works, transcriptions, collages, text works, and constructions. And I invite you all to take a look around once we're done with Jasmine's presentation. And if you are on Zoom, I invite you to plan a visit to the gallery. The exhibit will be here until February 1st. Now on to the main event. Jasmine is a fiber and installation artist joining us from Athens, Georgia. And she's a true Southern artist. Jasmine uses her memories and manipulations of her memories of her Carolinian family and childhood to create dialogues about the Black femme identity in the South. During her time in this residency, Jasmine has been exploring what she describes as James Castle's problem-solving techniques by pushing her own creative practice. Outside the studio, she's been visiting many of our local archives, trying our pastry shops, and riding her bike on the green belt. Inside the studio, she's been taking her research findings and creating on handmade paper and experimenting with different art tools. And now I'm going to leave you with Jasmine so that she can share with us about her experience here at the Castle House.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me here today to hear about my time, and thank you for everyone online joining as well. I am the current Castle resident, as was made clear by Monica, and I wanted to kind of bring you through my time here. I've been here for 9 weeks. The residency is usually 10 weeks. So I have 1 more week, but I'm glad y'all could join me here for this. So there we go. So a little bit about my practice before coming here. I tends to work with a lot of intergenerational stories around Black feminist conversations and Southern storytelling specifically. I work with personal experiences as well as folklore, folk history, and folk songs. And I try to mix the past with the present in some way. And so here's some examples of some of the materials I work in, which is a wider range of textiles and fibrous materials. So things like broomcorn, paper making, woodworking, embroidery, found materials like fabrics and things like that. So when I came here, I kept telling people I had 2 goals. Really, it was 3 goals. Let's be honest. And the first goal was to learn from Castle's work and expand my own drawing practice. So even though I'm an artist mostly known for working in textiles and these kind of larger physical objects, my practice actually is very drawing intensive. I'm usually in the studio making like anywhere between like 5 to like 10 drawings before I make an object. So there's all this drawing happening that no one's ever seeing. And people would always come to my studio and be like, why aren't the drawings the thing? Why are you doing all of this work into all of these drawings and then no one ever sees it? And I started thinking about that for a bit. And I was like, why is that? Like, why, when I make a drawing, I'm like, oh, this is not the end goal here for me. So I really wanted to interact with Castle's legacy as someone who Mark makes and really think about what that would mean for me in my practice. The second goal was to explore ideas around artistic interior worlds. I've been doing a lot of research leading up to this about specifically about Black identity interior worlds, about withdrawing oneself, about not truly being known by a larger world. And I thought, who can relate to an interior world more than James Castle? And there's something about his work where when we see his work, we understand that there's this rich person into making this work, but we are drawn in wanting to understand him more. And not every artist is capable of getting us to want to know them more from their art. So I really wanted to study that. And then the third goal was researching the folk histories and folk stories and folk songs that are available to this region. So I identify as a Southern artist, and most of my work up to this point has been based around the Southeast of the United States. And I really wanted to understand other parts of Americana outside of my home area and kind of see where the differences, where the similarities, what's being deemed more important to be archived here versus where I'm from. What kind of mysteries would I find? I love a good mystery box is what I call it, when you just call something from an archive and you don't know what you're gonna get. So I started my time here with what I would call maybe observations around Castle House in Boise. So these were more kind of direct connections or direct things I found. On the left here is kind of like my castle approach to the layout of the residency space. So this was kind of my abstraction of like the living space, the bathrooms, the closets, the studio spaces. And I think I noticed that I ended up using a lot more blues in this because he used this bluing or whitening bluing in a lot of his work. So I think that was where that started. In the middle there was a family of quails living right outside my studio. And they had like little hatchlings. There was like a family of like 13 babies. And I became very obsessed with them because where I'm from, quails are like a domesticated thing. You don't really get them in the wild, or at least I'm not used to it. So when I first saw them, I thought they were someone's pet that was free range. And then I quickly learned that quails are, just out here wild in Boise. And the image on the far right was kind of the first connection to ground me here. So I'm coming to a place where I've never been to the Pacific Northwest. I'm not really kind of familiar with this region and its history. And the one thing I brought with me to ground me was my banjo. And quickly after being here not too long, Sam, who works here, who's lovely enough to found a photograph of Frank Castle, James Castle's father, with his banjo. And so this instant connection I at least could have with the Castle family kind of helped ground me. So I did this combination self-portrait. And actually, if I'm just realizing that, oh, I guess y'all here in person, I guess in Zoom, y'all won't necessarily see that, but here in person, you're kind of getting blocked a little bit from seeing the portrait, but you'll see it in person in a second, so it's fine. So next was studies of Castle more specifically. I think I came in being interested very much in his paper doll constructions and the way he would arrange them in spaces and then draw this like curated group of people, objects. And so I came in originally wanting to look at that when I went to the archives and looking at how he constructed them and how they're made. And I even made my own kind of self-portrait version of one. Other things I wanted to study was I did the studies of the gaps in between the bundles. James Castle would often bundle his work with found materials or boxes and brown paper. And I was very interested in thinking about the care that went into this archival work he was doing of his own practice and what that looks like. I think a lot of us can kind of relate to there being at least maybe one member of a family who is the person who is the keeper of things and how the logistics of what that looks like. And there's kind of an art to keeping it, I would say, home archival. So that was a drawing that kind of grew from there. From the initial interest in, and you can see in the center of his drawings of how he would arrange the paper constructions and then create like these stages and draw. From there, I kind of got more interested in the physical constructions as well as his transcription. So he would find materials from advertisements and magazines, and he would just draw these images over and over again. So for each source is what they would call them at the collection, there would be multiple versions of them. And I started to kind of think about what I could learn from him from the slight differences in these transcriptions. So these are some other things I found in here. So this would be a good example of some of the transcriptions. So in the middle there, you can see the source. And then I found all these other drawings of castles of this source. In the top right, it's getting a little bit cropped by my head there, but I became interested in what I'm calling his crops, where he would have an image and he would draw it. And then occasionally he would have an image where he would just draw a portion of it and exclude information. And I was really interested in thinking about, why he would do that. Why does he have this, like, he's very interested in this larger scene. And then he has a scene where all of the faces are pretty much cropped out. We're focusing on like the legs of the boxer, and even he cropped it to the point where even the faces of the audiences are also being cropped out. So I became kind of interested in analyzing these. Of course, I can't fully know why he did that, but I think at least as an artist trying to connect with these decisions. These are some more transcriptions that kind of drew my attention. There was a series of illustrations done by Japanese children that he was really, really into. He found in a magazine, and he kept drawing and coming back to them. And there was this set here where it was like kind of an old-fashioned perm style, where and all of these are pretty similar. And then the one in the top left, he changes the character that's getting the perm. And that's the only one he does that to. And I recognize the character as in the top right here, you can see there's a little girl with the same red suspenders from a different illustration. And I started just kind of looking for these outliers in his work of like, where was he making these changes? Because we don't know the order in which he did any of these. That could be the last drawing, that could have been in the middle, that could have been the first one, I don't know. But it does make you kind of, it gives you like a little clue into his decision-making and problem solving as a image maker. Other archives I visited, so of course I visited the James Castle collection a few times, but I also went to the archives at Boise State, the main library here, the state archives, and so I found quite a few different things. Not everything was guaranteed to make it into an artwork, but I did at least learn some things. So this is some of the stuff I found at Boise State. I found photographs of different quilts that were of note to somebody in the 70s that probably was like in their family. I found data going back to collecting. There's a lot of visual riddles here in the collection. So usually a place I'd like to start when I'm looking at folk stories, folk histories, and folk just like collecting is children's games, children's rhymes, jump rope rhymes, things like that. And there was a category here for visual riddles that seemed to be like really popular that I hadn't seen, at least in the Southeast. Also things like photographs these photographs were taken in the 70s of these tombstones, but the tombstones, I think most of these are from like late 1800s, early 1900s. Someone thought this was important at some point and collected all of this. So, but this was some of the fun stuff I was seeing in the archives here to get a flavor for Boise. Other things I found in the archives is a lot of songs about Idaho. There's a lot of songs that I don't think have seen the light of day since someone made these, except for the Great Big Baked Potato. There is one lone YouTube video of two sweet ladies singing that, but the other songs, I could not find any records of, which is a shame because I really want to know what Idaho polka sounds like. I found just anything. I also found a collection of kind of dirty, raunchy, like cowboy songs and just like songs in general. It was kind of a random mix. But it was kind of fun to understand Boise a little bit more, especially given that I'm used to an East Coast perspective where in relation, this feels like a relatively new, well, I mean, it is relatively new city history, at least. And it was interesting to be able to tell that from the materials I was interacting with. So I've started making work that was kind of a mix of things I was interacting with in the archives and things I was interacting with around town. And then some of it kind of ended up coming back to Castle. So the left was a photo I found in the archives of, and this was kind of like my first mono print test here, but apparently a sheep had gotten on Boise State campus back in the day and they had to call the police to like escort it away. And I don't know, that drew my attention. The center is a monoprint of the stained glass windows at the African American Museum here in town, which was a church, and all the stained glass windows are still there, and the original stained glass windows that they ordered from the Sears and Roebuck's catalog. And you'll kind of see the scale of that later on in the open studio. The one on the right, I was really thinking about how Castle would make these constructions where he would kind of mix people and objects a lot. So there's these constructions where there'd be like a person with like a chair head, or there'd be like a what we would think would be like a paper doll. It was in the same structure as his other people, but it would be like a door. And so I found in, I think, the Boise State archives, there was someone who in the 70s who just went around documenting doors in Boise and door architecture. So I made this image thinking about both Castle's kind of mix of people and doors, and then thinking about someone in the 70s was like, this needs to be documented. And I mean, probably a lot of those buildings aren't here today, so at least someone documented the doors. I started thinking a little bit more about the transcriptions and the cropping, and reference to on the left here, there was the set of drawings that Castle did of the Lincoln Memorial. And when I was talking to people at the archives, they were saying that it took a while to find the source, but when they found it, it was this article highlighting these like 3 young Black people who were traveling around and posing with the Lincoln Memorial. And I thought it was so interesting that most of the source media that at least I saw in the collection, and they even noted that like doesn't really have like Black people in it, but Castle wasn't particularly interested in them, even though like they would have been an outlier for what he was seeing, because I don't think they met with the criteria that interested him for the transcriptions. Because when you're looking at the source material for a lot of his transcriptions for people, you're seeing like very social situations. So you're seeing people around like a campfire or picnicking at the beach or in first class and the airplane, like they're usually talking, or maybe they're wearing something interesting, or it's like a child with a very expressive face. So these 3 don't actually meet any of that criteria. So I understand why he wasn't particularly interested in it. So then I started to think, what sort of images with Black people would he possibly be interested in? So I started off with this kind of analyzing of the crop of these individuals, and then moving into the River Street photos that are archived in relationship with like the Irma Haven house. I kind of wanted these sister locations to talk a little bit. So I started looking through the archives and thinking like, what might have caught Castle's eye? So we had a discussion at the archives about how he was often attracted to things like similar but different, like things where there might have been repetition or rhythm in like imagery. So maybe you'd get a classroom full of kids, and that repetition of like a kid at a desk would draw his eye, but every kid's slightly different. Or the way he was interested in construction of clothes. So I'm looking at, okay, like maybe he'd be interested in these kids kind of in their oversized coats and like wanting to break down what that would look like. And so these kind of led to this image making of having the Irma Haven house and the River Street and kind of talking with Castle in a way. And these are all a mixture of monoprints. I think the center one's lino, and then the one on the right is a mixture of monoprint and collage. So back to the interior world I mentioned like way back when. These were probably the most, I guess, specifically personal ties versus just me kind of using my personal lens to combine things and collage things. These first 2, I think, were personally me trying to figure out where I was sitting as an artist in this space, and kind of bringing in elements of my own idea of the exterior of what we're seeing, what an artist can easily convey, and then what is kind of harder to read as an artist. And then that kind of branched into these 2 works where I was using more specific references to this place, both present and past. So there's references to the residency space as it is now, but also references to it in the past tied in with this idea of a withdrawal of self. And while I was here, I had a workshop. I decided that even though I brought over 150 sheets of handmade paper with me to draw on, that was not enough. I needed to make paper in Boise here. And in the vein of James Castle, I used recycled materials. So I used Trader Joe's bags and like recycled like newsprint and printer paper. And I had a pretty full workshop with the community. It was a pretty great turnout, where I showed them this technique called the blowout technique, which is image making with paper making. So you pretty much make a waterproof stencil. You take two, they're not really sheets of paper yet. They're really just flat pulp at that point. And you take your waterproof stencil, you cover one of the sheets, and then you spray away the pulp you don't want. So everything under the stencil stays. And then you can take that and you press it up against your other flat wet pulp, and then you press them together to make one unified sheet with one image, which is great for if you wanted to have a sheet with something on it already to draw on or collage, or just make a very just strong unified image in one form. And so this was part of the workshop. Here you can see my demo image, which is my stencil portrait of James Castle. So these are some of the blowouts I made extra sheets just in case, but everyone was so wonderful at the workshop, we didn't even need them. So I used them to make additional work. I was thinking about, I think the one in the center is, I actually did use the exact font of that Castle used when he used the word place. But other words like belong, I ended up kind of thinking about, I was thinking about Castle's relationship to this place specifically and his studio practice. So we have like belong above the cozy cottage, and of course the self-portraits. So bringing into my collage practice. So I also, not only did I repurpose and reuse Trader Joe's bags and things like that, I wanted to reuse things I didn't use. So anything that I made that wasn't going into a drawing, or things I found around town or anything like that. So failed attempts at prints, magazines, and then other things I made were bound to get used again. So I ended up making a bunch of other compositions so that nothing really went to waste, and making something I don't think I would have normally have made. So we've got on the left here, we've got a mix of text and found things, as well as I think a few portions of other drawings. We've got some of the failed attempts of the glass window, which you saw again. I ended up repurposing those into a new composition, which I'm actually has kind of this somewhat kind of historical ghostly feel to it. Since I made quite a few of the castle portraits, I wanted to kind of rework those into a different composition. And then I wasn't done repurposing. So the paper that I knew at a certain point, I've shown you quite a few drawings, but when you go into the studio, you'll see there's about a total of 41 drawings, prints, and collages on the wall. Paper I knew was not going to get made into a drawing got turned into these blank kind of sketchbooks. So everything, I tried to use whatever I could get my hands on that I already had brought with me or had found here. And that's it.
So we'll take some questions. If anybody in the audience has questions, or anybody online has questions, please put them into the chat and we can answer those questions. We have two people. Thank you
so much for making the connection to what you saw here. That was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. What do you think is going to be the impact of that in the rest of your work once you leave here? Will be some lasting changes? I don't know if change is the right word.
I think so. I think
So to repeat it, so people
okay, sorry.
online can hear the impact of her work and discoveries that she's made here. What would that look like in the future for her work? Is that
Sure?
Okay. I think so. I think there's a few things I'll take away from this. One, the research aspect of this, I think now what my goal is now to just do like a nationwide tour of all the special collections and kind of gather a larger entity around Americana folk archives. So that might be a project down the road. Another thing is the amount of like, just image making I was doing where there was definitely times where I was like tempted to be like, I should make an object based off this. And I was like, no, that's not what I'm here to do. And I think I definitely got more comfortable with the idea of like my drawing practice can be something that stands on its own. It's not just a stepping stone for something else. I think I definitely became more comfortable with that. So I thank James for that. And then I think some of the way I was working with the collages towards the end was something that I originally was inspired because I was like, well, you know, James is working with all these different materials and things he found and working, but I think I took away from that it's actually a very, it's funny because like my textiles are collages really, but I think I was thinking of collaging in a very different way. I don't know if it's maybe the scale or because I was going about this in a different way, but I think I'll take that away with me as well.
Fantastic, thank you.
Do you have a question, Alex?
It sounds like you were really prolific while you were here. I was curious if that was about the volume of work you expected that you might make, or did you feel James Castle sort of silently egging you on as a pace setter because he made so much stuff that you had to bundle in? What do you think about the volume that you did that?
So what did so I have to, okay, I'm gonna get used to this, bear with mine. So, what did I think about the volume of work I made, or did I have expectations around the volume? I don't think I initially knew what I was gonna do. I think I was very optimistic by bringing over 150 sheets of paper with me. I think, but I don't think I originally planned to make 150 drawings. I think I just brought them being like, some of these sheets will talk to me, some of them won't, I don't know. I think as I got about halfway through, I was like, okay, this is looking like this might be about 40 to 50 drawings. We'll see. And it honestly could have made it to 50, but I had to kind of give myself a cutoff of like, okay, you have to get ready for the presentation. But I think I am very surprised with the different mediums and ranges I went. Because I did a lot of monoprints while here. Monoprints is something that is relatively new for me. I did some lino. This was my first time really doing lino. This was my first time doing blowouts in a situation where it's very DIY. So I think the range of media I ended up being interested in doing while here was more surprising to me than maybe the amount.
It'll be fast. Just tell us about the print that you have.
Okay, so a little bit about this print specifically is I mentioned the quail family. When I was in the archives looking at some of the folk stories around here, or at least was like historical around here, there was themes around the reasoning for the story. So a lot of the stories were things like, what can we do to protect kids in our community? So it's like a monster story would just be to like scare a child into staying close to home, not being out at night. Which wouldn't necessarily be the case in other like places. Like there was a werewolf story, which was very much that, but in Georgia, werewolf story has a very different structure because it's more about keeping hierarchies versus keeping a community safe. And so I wanted to make something that kind of cued into that importance of like keeping like one's young safe that seemed to be present in a lot of the stories I was finding. But I did it through the lens of the quail family. I watched hatch outside. So that's where this print and a few different iterations of it come from.
So as far as I understand, this is your first time to Boise, right? Anything that surprised you about your last 9 weeks here, or things you particularly enjoyed exploring or experiencing about this very different landscape than the South?
So things that surprised me about Boise, and then things that like I enjoyed about Boise. First, the landscape surprised me. I didn't really know anything about how this is laid out. So I'm used to like trees blocking a lot of things. And though I've been to like, you know, the mountains to the coast on the southeast, I don't think I've been, and even like I've lived in valley areas, I don't think I've seen like a foothills spread situation where you can see everything and it's so open, but there's still lushness. Like this is not like you know, I'm thinking of like Texas, which is very flat and like still very open sky, but this is still a very green area. Everyone here has been very like welcoming in a way that has been like very pleasant. I don't think I was like, oh no, like people are not gonna be, I'm just saying like things I like
Yeah.
anyway. I really enjoyed the green belt. I say that as if I'm already gone. I'm gonna be enjoying it like tomorrow. I really enjoyed the size and scale of the city. Like it's a city where I think a lot of people here think of it as, I guess technically, like math wise, it's technically a small city, but the way it's arranged where it's like you've got multiple music venues, you've got like tons of different like parks and like walkways and places to go, and like there's constantly events happening. Like this feels like a community where um you're not bogged down by traffic, but there's still things to do. Um, I know a lot of people, when I said I was coming to Boise, were just like, your practice is very based in like a lot of like Black history. What are you going to Boise for? So a lot of people, I was just like, no, I've like seen Black people here. I've gone to like events with Black people. There's a history of like Black people who are like several generations in to Idaho who were here like before Boise became a city. And so like that was something to like be like, I had the hunch, but it was nice to be able to find that information as well. I think, I guess that answers the
That's great.
question. Yes, in the back.
Are there any kind of unsolved mysteries or unresolved qualities about how James Castle worked that you'll be left to speculate on or kind of be inspired by or hypothesize about?
So, like any like lasting like mysteries or questions I have around Castle that like I'm gonna be thinking like it's keeping me up at night for like the rest of my life. That's the thing that really I think it would interest us like a lot of people about his work is that there's so much about the compositions he's making and the wide a range of styles and emotions he's working with is that it's like, okay, one, he can do it all. That's already like one thing. But two, it's like, okay, why did he want to do it all? And how did it, and because we don't know the the time of any of this, it's like, you know, we don't know if one thing led to another thing or if he was doing all these things at once. And like, it's just, there's so many questions that raises, but I think that's what part of what being a good artist does. I think a good artist, one, points at something, and two, raises questions. And so I probably will constantly be wondering about mainly like for me, like the one thing I really want to know is for the work that he has that's very almost like cinematic. He has these drawings where it will be like two characters and it's kind of like over the shoulder shots and like a pan away and it feels very narrative. I want to know what those stories are. And then like the example I showed in the transcriptions where it'd be like the same image and a lot of times it'll be like minimal changes, like maybe color, maybe slightly, but it's like, why did this one image have a change? Or I talked a little bit about the crops. I didn't talk about the change in perspective. There was a few where he would have an image and then there'd be one image where the perspective looks a little skewed. And we don't know if maybe there was another source image that was part of like a set of source images where maybe that's where that image came from, or is he skewing some perspective slightly where it's like you're seeing a part of the conversation from a different angle? I don't know. Unless maybe we find the source images to prove that he was just going off a different image or not. I don't know. But though that will keep me up at night. Yes.
When you go into archives, are you just like looking for whatever's clever? Like what sort of hairs do you follow?
For here, just due to the, okay, well, first, let me repeat that. When I'm going into archives, what I'm looking for. Due to the time, I couldn't just be like, pull me a random box, like, you know, like librarian or archivist. So I had to kind of go in with an idea of what I was looking for. So in the case of the state archives, I specifically was like, okay, let me use searches that has folk song. And that gave me everything from radio scripts from like folk song radio shows, which was really interesting seeing how like they were thinking, to like raunchy collections of folk songs, which were censored in a weird way. They would put it like the first word of the bad word and they put dashes so you kind of have to guess what the word is. to, to other things where it's like, okay, maybe I'm looking for folklore, folk history, or maybe I'll type in things like story and be like, what is that? And then go there and be like, is this what y'all have there? Or a place, like maybe you type in like a specific like neighborhood. I would usually like look online at first to kind of see what I was looking for and then go there in person and be like, hey, is this what I think it might be? So that's I usually have like at least a word I'm looking for, and sometimes the word leads to something else, because I think the radio scripts were something I found because I was originally looking under a certain person's name, and then that led to like this other thing. But usually it's like I usually have a core, and then I'll kind of do detective work where I'm like, oh, this is leading to this thing. Let's see if I type a word that I found in this other thing, maybe I can figure that out. So in the case of this specifically, I did not come in being like random stuff, but sometimes it's fun to do that. But I still found a bunch of interesting things. Like there was something about like the copyright laws with like the official state song and the university songs in Idaho. That was like, someone didn't get the copyright. They just deemed a song like the official song. And like there was a weird legal battle back in the day. Like I didn't expect to go on that adventure, but I did.
Any other questions? Okay, it doesn't seem like there's any questions online. Thank you so much, Jasmine, for sharing with us everything that you discovered while being here and all the awesome things that you've been making. Thank you, Sierra and Lavona, for your interpretation tonight. And thank you all for being here present, and then all of you who are virtual. It's been a great night, and all of you that are here, we're gonna open up her studio so you can come in there and check out her work. And everybody online, I hope you have a good evening and you make it over to the Castle House sometime.